Okay, we want to welcome everybody. I'm confident that if we got started a little bit late, that Tracy would dock us with a late to the T penalty. So we don't want that to happen. So we've got most everybody here, and we'll go on and get started. We want to welcome you to our volunteer program webinar. My name is Carr McCalla. I've been with the LGA for a number of years, and I'm currently serving as our senior advisor. I've got also with us today Jacob Oakes, who is our Director of Championship Operations. And fortunately for me, he's serving as our technical advisor today. Had we not been able to corral Jacob into doing that, we'd be in serious trouble today. So we're excited to have him with us as well. We certainly want to thank everyone for their interest. I'm going to turn it over to Jacob right now just for a second to talk a little bit about some ground rules and how we're going to try to deal with questions that you might have throughout the course of the webinar.
Okay, thanks, Carr, and welcome everyone. Just a couple of things on your control panel. You should have just three options. One is the mute unmute button. Right now, everyone is muted, and we're going to leave everyone muted for the presentation. The second option is to go full screen, and then the third option is a raise your hand button. And I have the ability to see that. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just raise your hand, and I'll see that, and we can I can unmute you, and we can get your question answered. It's pretty straightforward and pretty simple.
Thanks, Jacob. As Jacob mentioned, please, anytime you have a question during the course of the webinar, click that button and we'll try to get to you just as quickly as we can. We also have a couple of slides throughout the webinar, question slides. So if you have something that you don't feel like is critical at the point in time you think about it, just jot it down. And when we get to our question slide, we'll take as much time as we need to answer any questions that you have. Our slideshow is we've got about 25 slides. We anticipate that we'll be here for 45 to 60 minutes, depending on how many questions we have. We're, as I mentioned, we're excited to have you here. What we want to do today is just kind of give you an overview of the kinds of volunteer opportunities that we'll have for you during the course of this year. And this is just going to be a general overview of the opportunities that we'll present to you. In 2019, there were a couple things happened that made us really realize how much we could utilize some additional volunteer help. That was the year that the Louisiana Golf Association merged with the Louisiana Women's Golf Association, which we were excited to have happen. And as a consequence, we began to conduct the Louisiana Women's Golf Association events. We also at that time began an initiation of our Louisiana Junior Golf Tour, which was something that we had talked about for a number of years, but finally was able to crank that thing up. And what basically that meant was that with the same number of staff people, we were conducting significantly more championships and or events. So it became apparent that anything we could do to encourage our volunteer help would be beneficial to the program. So it's taken us a couple of years to try to get that kind of structured out, but those were the things that really precipitated us trying to put a little bit more structure to our volunteer program. What we want to do is talk a little bit about the kinds of opportunities we have. We have really two overall categories for volunteer help. One is championship administration volunteer, and that's what we're going to talk about for the majority of time today. And then our course rating volunteer program is the second big category, the LGA is currently looking for volunteers that are able to contribute in both categories. Although, as I mentioned, championship administration volunteers are much more critically needed right now. There'll be significantly more opportunities to participate as a championship administration volunteer currently. That said, we welcome involvement, obviously, in both areas. As we look at our championship administration volunteer opportunities, those volunteers will help LGA staff with the conduct of LGA Championship and qualifying events, which obviously with the merging of the Louisiana Women's Golf Association will conduct events for both men and women. Our Louisiana Junior Golf Tour events, which we provide for both boys and girls. And then our USGA local and sectional qualifiers. As a allied golf association with the USGA, they ask us to conduct a number of their qualifying events for really each of their championships where an event or a qualifier is held in our jurisdiction. And depending on the volunteer's experience and expertise, we feel like the volunteers will fall into the following three categories. A general volunteer, which I think probably most of you will fall into that category, a rules volunteer, and then a senior rules official. Now, there are obviously going to be some overlap in these areas, and even though you may sign up as one of a specific one of these, there will be times when we'll ask you to do some things that might ordinarily be the purview of another group, but we're certainly going to do this in a way that we don't put you in a situation that you're not comfortable with. Since we've joined together with the women and since we've started the Junior Golf Tour, we have determined in looking at the schedules that we've got about 13 LGA events that are some are 2 days, some 3 days, some 4 days. We've got about 7 Louisiana Junior Golf Tour events, and then we conduct approximately 7 USGA qualifiers. That changes a little bit year to year, but generally speaking, we've got about 50 actual dates during the year that we conduct either a championship or a qualifier. And so we've got a number of dates where we would love to have some volunteer help to help us conduct the events. Now, what we want to do now is give you just a little bit of an idea of what those 3 different categories entail. As I mentioned earlier, most individuals will initially fall into the general volunteer category, which can include any number of different responsibilities. As examples, registration host or hostess, 4caddy or spotter, a shuttle driver, and you see the one that's highlighted there's a pace of play monitor. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about that. The first 3 really are self-explanatory. The shuttle driver, we won't need shuttle drivers at all of our events, but at any event where our participants are walking, like junior events, some of our USGA qualifiers, if there are significant distances between holes, if it's a little bit of a walk between the green of one hole and the tee of the next, we may have need for shuttle drivers. That's what the picture is showing there. And then other duties as needed. Obviously, that's kind of a catch-all term, as each venue may have specific circumstances that we may need some extra help in some other areas. And as I mentioned earlier, it is always our intent that we not put you in a situation where you are uncomfortable and or unprepared. So some of the things that we're going to cover in the webinar today are things that you may not know much about. That's okay. We'll take as much time as we need to train you, to help you understand the significance and the the little idiosyncrasies of some of the things we're going to ask you to do, but our intent is to never put you in a situation that you're going to be uncomfortable in. We mentioned pace of play monitor. This is something that, again, all of our volunteers will at some point in time probably participate as a pace of play monitor. But certainly our general volunteers will be asked to do this on occasion. At all events that the LGA conducts, the competitors are expected to play according to the LGA's posted pace of play policy. Players will have been provided with this policy prior to the competition. More than likely, we will have sent this out to them in an email the week prior to the event, and they'll also receive the pace of play policy on the first tee. We'll provide a timing sheet for our monitors to use in order to document each group's pace. If a group falls behind their designated pace, our monitor will ask the group to help us by picking up their pace to that dictated by the policy. And this brings up something that we feel is really, really important. What we are trying to do with respect to staff, senior rules officials, and our rules volunteers, all of our volunteers, is to create an atmosphere of partnership with our players. If we're not careful, the players can perceive rules officials or staff as somebody that's looking over their shoulder to try to find something they're doing wrong. That is not what we want to project. We want to project a sense of we're here to help you. We're here to facilitate what we need to with respect to the competition. When a lot of times when we approach a group or an individual about the fact that they may be a little bit behind, ordinarily, because we've done this for so long, their first question to us is, are we behind, or do we need to speed up? So we have tried for a number of years to create that kind of atmosphere of cooperation and partnership. So it's important that our volunteers, just as our staff, recognize that that's not something that just happens. There's an art to the language of the conversation that we have with our players, and so it's important that we create that kind of atmosphere and circumstance to the degree we can. The timing sheet that we have on the slide is something that anyone who is a pace of play monitor will use. You can see we have the starting time for a group. We have the group's individuals listed. I think that the first starting time there, I believe, is 7:30, and you'll see under hole number 1, this is a timing sheet that has as its intervals 15 minutes a hole. And you'll see at the end of hole number 1, they should have completed that by 7:45. Hole number 2 by 8 o'clock. And you can make notes here. Let's assume that first group plays the first hole in 14 minutes, and they're going to be 1 under par for their time par, and you'll put just a -1 there. So this is a way that we can document our pace. We can identify the groups that are slow, and again, as long as we approach them in the right manner, we have been very pleased with the response that our players give us and their willingness to get back on time. So those were the areas that our general volunteers will ask them to help us with. Our rules volunteers, and this is going to be a little bit longer presentation, volunteers whose goal is to learn more about the rules of the game and the actual administration of the competition may want to become rules volunteers. These individuals should have a legitimate interest in the rules of golf and a sincere desire to enhance their knowledge of the rules. Rules volunteers will be encouraged to consider utilization of the USGA's Rules Hub, found under the Playing tab at usga.org, and they'll also be given the opportunity for additional responsibilities as their rules knowledge increases. And even though I think a number of y'all will start as general volunteers, we're hopeful that you'll develop an interest in the rules and work towards becoming a rules volunteer. As I mentioned earlier, we want to be sure that we create a relationship with our players so that they see us, rules volunteers, general volunteers, and staff, as out there to help them avoid a breach of the rules, as opposed to looking over their shoulder to try to find a breach. And that's something that doesn't just happen. It's something that you have to work at, and that's a really, really important part of what we want to get across today as it relates to our volunteers. As you approach somebody, if they have a rules question or have something that they've called you over for, typically our response is, how can I help you? Why don't you walk me through what's happened so we can try to figure out what we need to do here, as opposed to, you find a person that's looking for a loose ball and you say, boy, it's pretty getting close to that 3 minutes. You need to find that thing pretty quick. You can see the difference in the approach and how our participants might perceive the volunteer or the staff person given the different approaches. Okay, the rules volunteer functions. They'll be asked to fill a number of roles depending upon their experience and rules expertise. Some of the most common will be pace of play monitor. We've talked a little bit about that, and we'll ask our rules volunteers to participate in that area as well. Starter's assistant, scoring area official, scoring area assistant, suspension and resumption of play monitor, on-course rules of golf communication conduit with senior rules official or LGA staff. And we'll take a few minutes and talk about each one of these to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're looking for in terms of help. And again, one thing I want to mention, a couple of these things can get a little bit confusing if you've never worked with rules. So we're going to take some time and go through some of them. Don't get anxious if through this discussion we confuse you on some of these. That's not our intent. But what we want to do is just give you a little bit of a feel for what some of the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis at our championships. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our intent is for you not to necessarily be able to do all these things on day one, but we do want you to understand and recognize the importance that these functions play in the conduct of the events. As I mentioned, we've talked about the pace of play monitor. The next category will be a starter or a starter's assistant. Starter is critical to the success of the event. Responsibilities include to distribute scorecards and other important information to players prior to the beginning of the round. There'll be a number of things we'll give them, like the pace of play policy, etc. Ensuring that players begin play on time. Informing any player late to the tee that they are subject to the appropriate penalty. That's not a lot of fun, but that's an important part of keeping play on pace and keeping play going. And then creating a cheerful and welcoming but professional atmosphere on the tee. You want to be friendly, but you also want to be sure that you keep play going, that whenever that starting time comes up, you've got that first tee in the ground ready to go. LGA starters will utilize specific scripts for a number of starters functions in order to maintain consistency throughout all LGA conducted events. And due to the critical nature of this responsibility, we will most likely ask individuals to serve as a starter's assistant for a period of time in order to gain an understanding of the important function this position serves. Then our scoring area official and scoring area assistant. This is similar to the people that work on the first tee. Scoring area, obviously very important. The rules of golf are very specific as to the player's responsibilities regarding certifying hole scores and returning the scorecard. A quiet, calm scoring area manned by scoring area officials that are clearly there to assist the players is what we want to project. It's an area reserved exclusively for the scoring area officials and the players just finishing their rounds. A good scoring area official will check individual hole scores with each player to be sure there are no inadvertent errors. Another area that will likely require observation as a scoring area assistant prior to being comfortable handling scoring area official responsibilities. One of the things that we found this year with COVID and with the desire to limit touch points is that the scoring area is going to be an area that will continue to evolve. We did a number of things this year as it relates to electronic scoring, and we're still trying to work through the best way to do that. So this again is an area that, we've always had scorecards, paper scorecards. We're trying to figure out right now what's the best way to move forward here. Again, with the issue of not wanting to have many touch points and yet still being sure we've got a way to document and to validate the scores on the scorecards. Now, the next slide we've got coming up is our first question slide. Do we have anybody that has a question yet, Jacob?
No, sir.
Okay, well, don't be bashful. The only question that's a bad question is the one you need to ask, and don't ask it. So please don't hesitate if something that we've mentioned has confused you, or if you have a question about it, don't hesitate to raise your hand. Okay. Okay, we'll move on then. One of the things I want to mention is that on the next few slides that we have coming up, we're going to talk about some specific rules. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't want you to be anxious if you're not totally clear on the rules. If you've got a rule book or if you've got the USGA rules app, once we get done, you can certainly take a minute and go back and review some of the rules that we're going to go over with you. The last two functions that we're going to have our rules volunteers help us with are the suspension and resumption of play monitor, and then helping be a rules conduit for our players and our senior rules official. The suspension and resumption of play monitor, we want to talk a little bit about the two suspensions of play, two types of suspensions. Under Rule 5.7b, under parenthetical 1 of that rule, it talks about an immediate suspension, such as when there is imminent danger. This is what we used to call suspension for a dangerous situation. The committee declares an immediate suspension of play. All players must stop play at once and must not make another stroke until the committee resumes play. And it's indicated by one long air horn blast. Rule 5.7b2 is a normal suspension, such as for darkness or an unplayable course. If we've got a lot of rain without any lightning, sometimes the course can become unplayable and we will have to suspend for that case. Or if we've got fog early in the morning, that's not a dangerous situation, but if we need to suspend, that would be a normal suspension. The committee suspends play for a normal reason other than for imminent danger. The players have options depending on whether they are between holes or playing a hole. And if you want to look at how that rule reads, just go to that rule in the rule book and it will give you a quick synopsis of what players have in terms of options under a normal suspension. And that's usually, in our case, always indicated by 3 short air horn blasts. And the reason we want to go through this is we want all of our volunteers to understand the difference between the two types of suspensions so that if asked, they can disseminate accurate information to the competitors. And one thing I'll mention here is that this is not something that is going to come on us all of a sudden. We will have been on the radio. We will have been looking at the weather channels to see if we've got some inclement weather coming in. So if we feel like we're going to have to look at the possibility of a suspension in the next short period of time, we will have been on the radio talking to all of our volunteers, being sure they have an air horn with them, being sure we've spaced them out over the golf course so that everybody can hear the air horn. So this is not something that, again, is going to happen all of a sudden. We'll be prepared, and we will have told everybody where to go and to be sure they've got their air horn ready to roll. Once the decision is made to suspend play due to imminent danger, such as approaching inclement weather, it's critical that players be informed quickly regarding the suspension. Typically, it's an all hands on deck circumstance where all staff, senior rules officials, and/or rules volunteers are involved in sounding air horns and canvassing the entire course to indicate to the players that play has been suspended for imminent danger and they are to take shelter immediately. So again, after we blow the horn, suspend play, we will want our staff and volunteers to canvass the course. If we're in an area that's, let's say we've got a golf course that's in a housing development and it's not all encapsulated very closely, then we're going to want to have somebody go out and ride the front nine, ride the back nine, to be sure we don't have somebody out there that didn't hear the horn or for whatever reason is not aware of the suspension of play. After the storm has passed and the course is ready for a resumption of play, the same group that handled the suspension will again canvass the course to make sure all players are in place so that play may be resumed. Resumption is indicated by 2 short air horn blasts. So just as we wanted to be sure we got everybody off the course when we suspended, before we blow the horn to resume play, we want to also ride the course to be sure that we've got everybody in position, ready to go when we blow the air horn to resume play. And then our last area that we want to talk about as it relates to our championship volunteers is the on-course rules of golf conduit with a staff and senior rules official. Giving on-course rulings to players is best reserved for LGA staff or senior rules officials. There may be times, however, when our rules volunteers are called on to act as a communication conduit between a player in need of a ruling and one of our LGA staff or senior rules officials. There'll be times when the rules issue can be described over the radio and a determination on how to proceed made in relatively short order. You'll see the picture there. Looks like this guy has hit his ball into a penalty area, and he's trying to figure out his relief area, and he's not sure whether he needs to use 1 club length or 2 within which to drop his ball. And so this is a circumstance, if you're called over as a rules volunteer and a guy asks you or a lady asks you, I'm not sure about what area I have to drop in, it would be very easy to get on the radio, talk to one of our staff persons or senior rules officials, get a quick answer, and get that guy back in play and not have an issue with our pace. So that's a circumstance where one of our senior rules officials doesn't necessarily need to be there. There'll also be times when the rules issue is a bit more complex and will necessitate LGA staff or senior rules official being present to make the ruling. Again, if you get on the phone, get on the radio, and if you've got one of those individuals close by, they can get there in their cart, and again, we can get play going again without having issues with backing up the field. Oftentimes, however, this will not be possible without delaying play. In other words, if they're not close by, it may be that we will want to utilize Rule 20.1C3. And that's a rule that allows the player to play the hole out with 2 balls, utilizing a very specific process. If that rule is utilized, the committee will rule on the uncertain issue once the round is complete. The player must consult with the committee before the player signs the scorecard or validates the score. And we're going to read through that rule here in just a minute. But basically, if you as a rules volunteer get called over by a player, typically there are going to be 3 outcomes. You're going to be able to radio into our senior rules official or staff person and get a quick answer, as we've shown in this picture, and get that guy back on the golf course and back playing again. If you've got a situation that's a little bit more complex and you can radio into a rules official who is close, then they can get there relatively quickly. We can get the rule situation rectified, get the guy back on the course and playing, and not have an issue as well. And then other times, the third scenario will be the utilization of the Rule 20.1C3 and playing a second ball. Now, this is that rule, and we're just going to read the text of the rule here. And it may be that if you've not ever used this, may be a little bit confusing to you. The language can sometimes be confusing, but if you've got a question about this rule, certainly raise your hand and we can spend as much time as we need to help you understand this. Playing 2 balls when uncertain what to do. A player who is uncertain about the right procedure while playing a hole may complete the hole with 2 balls without penalty. Let me give you just kind of a quick example of what we're talking about here. Let's say that you've hit the ball just out of the fairway and you have landed on a bare dirt maintenance path. Well, you know that cart paths are immovable obstructions and you get relief, but you're not sure about this bare dirt maintenance path. This is a circumstance where you're uncertain about the right procedure. So what we have here is a rule that creates an availability of you to play 2 balls, but it's a very specific procedure that you have to use in order to utilize this rule. The player must decide to play 2 balls after the uncertain situation arises and before making a stroke. In other words, if you hit the ball on that bare path and you hit your shot from the path and you think, well, I'm not sure whether or not I got relief there. It's too late now because you have played a stroke after the uncertain situation has arisen. Players should choose which ball will count if the rules allow the procedure used for that ball by announcing that choice to his or her marker or to another player before making a stroke. So again, using this example, you get into a situation where you're not sure what to do. What you would want to do is say, I'm going to play 2 balls and I would like the ball to count with which I am taking relief from this bare dirt maintenance path. So now you have done all the things you need to do to allow this rule to play itself out. The player does not choose in time. The ball played first is treated as the ball chosen by default. The player must report the facts of the situation to the committee before returning the scorecard, even if the player scores the same with both balls. The player is disqualified if he or she fails to do so. So the player, if they're going to utilize this rule, they've got some pretty serious responsibilities. So it's important to understand that. And as a rules volunteer or a rules official, you want to be sure that you've gone over all this information if you get in a situation where a player is playing 2 balls. If the player made a stroke before deciding to play a second ball, This rule does not apply at all, and the score that counts is the score with the ball played before the player decided to play the second ball. The player gets no penalty for playing the second ball. Second ball played under this rule is not the same as a provisional ball under 18.3. As most of you, I'm sure, know, a provisional ball is a ball that you play for a ball that might be lost outside a penalty area or might be out of bounds. So these are two separate rules that really, they really don't have any significance to each other. They're two separate rules, and you want to be sure that you understand the difference. Okay, we're going to take a minute after this slide to see if there are any questions about anything that we've gone over to this point. Hard to believe we have no questions, but that appears to be the case. Okay, we'll move on. Our third category is that of senior rules officials. LGA senior rules officials are those individuals that have completed a USGA PGA Rules of Golf workshop within the past 4 years and have scored a passing grade on the post-workshop test. They will have had extensive experience serving as rules officials in a number of settings. Senior rules officials will provide in-person rulings as well as, when appropriate, through communication with LGA rules volunteers, as we mentioned a few minutes ago. And we are fortunate to have a number of individuals in Louisiana that meet this criteria. Our hope is that some of you will develop a desire to become a senior rules official as well. As a matter of fact, we've got 2 of our senior rules officials on the webinar today. Mike Raby and Tracy McGowan have helped us a number of times in the past, and we're so excited to have them willing to help us as well. So not only will those of you that are just starting your excursion into volunteering be able to hopefully learn from us as staff, you'll also have an opportunity of visiting and learning from our senior rules officials that will be helping us as well. Then our second major function for our volunteers is course rating volunteers. The LGA is the only organization licensed by the USGA to provide handicapping and course rating services to Louisiana's golfers and clubs. The LGA currently has a northern rating team and a southern rating team in place, but we're always looking for new raters that would like to become involved. New volunteer raters will be asked initially to participate as observers, riding with and learning from more experienced raters and LGA staff. Teams are assigned courses in their geographic area, and along with the LGA's Director of Member Services, typically rate and measure or remeasure 5 to 10 courses annually. This year we may actually be doing a few more courses. We've got a couple of facilities that are doing some renovation, and so as a consequence, we may have a few more courses that we'll rate in 2021. When rating a course, the team evaluates each hole using the USGA course rating system guidebook. The majority of the team's time is spent measuring distances to various obstacles from specific landing zones based on shot parameters. Might mention that rates are not scheduled on weekend days. We are currently in need of additional raters in Southwest Louisiana, basically the Lafayette to Lake Charles area. We really could use some additional people that have an interest in rating to help us in those areas. As we mentioned earlier, the current time, there'll be less opportunity for volunteer involvement in this area than in the championship administration area. One thing I want to mention too, a lot of people think, when we go out and rate courses, we just make a very quick judgment. Well, this is a really difficult course, so we're going to rate this really high. It is not, that is not what happens. It's not a subjective process. It's very objective. The USGA course rating system guidebook gives you very specific criteria for how you rate a course. What we'll do in really in all cases is identify what the landing zones are for different levels of play, and then we'll measure from the middle of the fairway at those landing zones to bunkers, to out of bounds, to penalty areas, and based upon the distance between the middle of the fairway and those obstacles, we'll go to the guidebook, and that will give you a value that you plug into the rate for that particular hole. The USGA also hosts calibration seminars each year for staff, and sometimes we are able to send some volunteers to that as well, so that from Washington to Florida, from New York to California, we have the same consistent criteria for how these courses are rated. That's the way that the handicap system works relative to creating very consistent ratings for different courses throughout the country. One thing is, as we get close to closing, one thing we want to really mention to everybody is that you as a volunteer will be representing our organization. And while we are tremendously appreciative to those volunteering their services, appropriate appearance, language, demeanor, dependability, etc., are traits that we will expect from our volunteers when you are representing the LGA. The interaction you have with individuals may be their most memorable exchange with an LGA representative, and we want that experience to be a very positive one. You know, we talked earlier about creating a partnership type atmosphere with our players. This kind of goes along with that. We don't want them to feel like we're lording over them. We want them to feel like that we are partnering with them to create a great experience at an LGA event or an LGA rate. So that's an important thing that we want everybody to recognize. LGA will provide you with an LGA shirt and cap and ask that you wear khaki pants, shorts, or a skirt as appropriate. We are still working on the sign-up process for our championship volunteers, and we hope to be complete with that soon. But as soon as we get that complete and have it finalized, we will send out an email to those of you that have expressed an interest with instructions on how to sign up. While we don't have the sign up ready quite yet, we encourage you to go to our website, take a look at our 2021 schedule. The website is www.lgagolf.org, and you can get a little bit of a feel for what might work within the course of your schedule within your area. So we would encourage you to do that, and we will get those we'll get the sign up instructions out just as quickly as we can. For course rating volunteers, our Director of Member Services, Kyle Nagdeman, we've got a listing of all of you that have expressed an interest in course rating. It's not quite as concrete as our schedule for events is. So when we have an upcoming rate in an area close to you, if we need some help, Kyle will certainly get a hold of you. And again, as you begin your volunteer service with course rating initially, we'll probably just have you ride along with some of our current raters to get a feel for what it looks like and how the rate is conducted. We have asked most of you to fill out an information form, and I think we've gotten, other than 2 or 3 people, we've gotten information forms back from everybody. Once we complete these webinars, we'll take a look and see if we have some people that have attended that we haven't gotten a form back from, and we'll send you a form, a link to a form that we'd ask you to fill out so that we've got your contact information available to us. This is really our last slide, and we'll leave this slide up for a few minutes and see if we've got any. If you have any questions to follow up with, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. For those of you that have questions about our championship administration volunteer program, Jacob Oakes, who you've heard from earlier tonight, is our Director of Championship Operations. This is his email address. He is at the at extension 2 and our 265-3938 number. If you have questions about course rating, Kyle Nagdeman, who is our Assistant Executive Director and Director of Member Services, that's his bailiwick. And so if you've got questions about our course rating program, that is Kyle's email address, and he is at extension 3, again at the 265-3938 number. Jacob, any questions? We've got a smart group out there, it looks like to me. Listen, we really do appreciate y'all spending some time with us tonight. Don't hesitate if you have questions after you've had a chance to kind of digest some of this stuff. Please don't hesitate to call the office. We really want to do whatever we can do to facilitate your comfort level as it relates to helping us with our volunteer program and our championships and our course rating. All right, we're going to sign off. Well, again, we appreciate more than you know your willingness to share your time with us tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing many of you this summer at some of our events. Thanks again.